Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so when you hear American Wild West, your mind probably jumps straight to sweeping dust storms, fearless cowboys, and, legendary high noon gunfights. But underneath all that iconic imagery, the stuff that really captivated the world, lies a totally different reality. Today, we're going to unpack the true, unfiltered history of this defining era. So, what is the actual historical story behind America's most legendary era? To really understand it, we've got to peel back those cinematic layers. Because for every stoic cowboy you've seen on screen, there is an incredibly arduous, unforgiving life. Behind the famous outlaws were deeply complex stories of survival. And every single frontier town, well, it was built on a brutal, daily struggle just to exist in a totally untamed landscape. It's kind of funny, right? Hollywood has been selling us this very specific, polished vision for decades. Constant shootouts, perfectly clean-cut, purely white cowboys, and folks getting incredibly rich literally overnight. But the historical reality? It was gritty. We're talking grueling, backbreaking labor, deeply diverse backgrounds, and frankly, staggering mortality rates. If we really want to grasp how modern America was forged, we have to strip away the fiction. Let's get into the facts. Before European settlers started arriving in massive numbers, this region was a boundless, untamed frontier. I mean, think about the sheer scale here, stretching all the way from the mighty Mississippi River straight to the Pacific Ocean. It was millions of acres of untouched wilderness. You had endless sprawling grasslands, blistering, scorching deserts, towering snow-capped mountains, and incredibly dense forests. But here's the thing, this vast expanse was far from empty. Long before it became a frontier for ambitious settlers, it was already home. Tribes like the Apache, Sioux, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Navajo had been thriving here for literally thousands of years. Each of these sovereign nations had its own rich traditions, complex languages, and a way of life that was totally intertwined with the land and those massive buffalo herds. They relied on them for absolute survival, everything from food and clothing to shelter. And that brings us to a really crucial point. To these tribes, the land absolutely wasn't a commodity. It wasn't something you could just buy, own, or fence off. It was something to be profoundly respected. This foundational worldview, this deep spiritual connection with nature, stood in stark contrast to the wave of settlers who started showing up in the 1800s. When those pioneers looked westward at that exact same landscape, they just saw opportunity, a massive empty canvas to claim and build a brand new future on. Well, that inevitable clash of visions is exactly what sparked the Great Westward Expansion. In the early 1800s, things shifted dramatically. Just imagine this for a second. Packing your entire life, your family, your tools, your absolute most precious belongings into one fragile wooden wagon. You're leaving behind everything familiar to head into the complete unknown. Driven by a crazy mix of desperation and hope, these families carve these deep paths across the continent, completely changing the trajectory of American history forever. To really put this into perspective, we have to talk about the distance, 2,000 miles. That is how far these folks traveled along routes like the Oregon and Santa Fe trails, mostly on foot. It was a bone-rattling, exhausting journey that could easily take 6 continuous months, sometimes even longer. Just putting one weary foot in front of the other, day after day, with absolutely no guarantee you'd actually make it. And honestly, those 6 months were fraught with constant, looming danger. Countless families never reached their destination. They were up against freezing winters and then suddenly dealing with scorching, unforgiving deserts. They had to cross deadly rivers, all while trying to dodge cholera, dysentery, and starvation. Plus, they were facing attacks from opportunistic criminals, as well as armed conflicts with native groups who were, understandably, defending their ancestral homelands from this massive influx of strangers. Eventually, that steady stream of wooden wagons turned into an absolute explosion of migration. While the early 1800s saw the agonizingly slow beginnings of those wagon trails, the real game changer happened in 1848. Gold was discovered in California. And man, that acted like a spark in a powder keg. Within just a few months, news of this echoed around the globe, totally supercharging both the scale and the urgency of heading west. Literally almost overnight, an astonishing 300,000 people rushed west. Everyone was just desperate to strike it rich. Now, the historical truth is, while a lucky handful did pull fortunes out of the earth, the vast majority definitely didn't. But regardless of who got rich, this massive wave of humanity completely transformed California. Booming towns popped up from nothing, new industries launched, and a powerful economic engine was built on the Pacific coast in the blink of an eye.
Okay, so with all these new towns booming, people needed to eat, right? And that leads us to probably the most famous symbol of the entire era, the cowboy. Now, the cowboy has become America's ultimate symbol of rugged independence and romantic rebellion. But behind that heavily romanticized myth was actually one of the absolute toughest, most exhausting, and dangerous jobs on the frontier. It was a far cry from the polished, shootout-obsessed action heroes you see in modern movies. And here's something crucial. These frontier laborers didn't look anything like the sanitized movie stars we're used to. The real historical cowboy was part of a deeply diverse workforce brought together out of pure necessity. We're talking seasoned Mexican vaqueros, formerly enslaved Black Americans looking for a fresh start after the Civil War, skilled Native American horsemen, and new European immigrants. They worked for pretty modest wages, riding for hours under a blistering sun to drive thousands of unpredictable cattle across hundreds of perilous miles. Actually, if we really look at it, much of this iconic culture stems directly from deep Mexican roots. The vaquero, who was a highly skilled Mexican horseman, pretty much originated the techniques, the traditions, and even the vocabulary of what we now call American cowboy culture. Words like rodeo, lasso, corral, they all trace their lineage right back here. Simply put, without the absolute mastery of the vaquero, the legendary American cowboy just does not exist. And you know their instantly recognizable clothing? Yeah, it definitely wasn't a fashion statement. It was highly practical, essential survival gear. Those wide-brimmed hats were absolutely necessary to block out the punishing sun. Heavy leather chaps, they protected legs from thorny brush and rogue animal horns. Bandanas were tied tight to keep the choking trail dust out of their lungs. And those strong, high-heeled boots made sure they stayed firmly anchored in the stirrups. Whether they were repairing fences, crossing flooded rivers, or sleeping under the open sky, every piece of gear had a critical purpose. So millions of cattle are moving north. Iron railroad tracks are starting to stitch the continent together, which begs the question, what happened when these dusty, isolated trails turned into booming towns? Well, we start to see a massive shift. We transition away from the sprawling isolation of the open plains right into the chaotic, densely packed, fast-paced world of frontier settlements. Driven by the frantic pursuit of gold and silver and propelled by the new railroads, these small frontier camps exploded with dizzying speed. I mean, towns literally materialized from the dust almost overnight. Suddenly, you had muddy streets densely lined with raucous saloons, grand hotels, fortified banks, and busy blacksmith shops. This was the birth of the American boomtown. It was a place of unparalleled, rapid economic growth, but, as you might guess, it was also a cauldron of intense volatility and danger. Because with all that massive, unchecked money flowing in, came an equally massive surge in violent crime. These wealthy, isolated towns were basically giant magnets for opportunists of all kinds. You had slick professional gamblers, desperate horse thieves, and highly organized bank and train robbers. This chaotic, unregulated environment birthed notorious names you definitely know, like Jesse James and Billy the Kid. The sheer, reckless speed of frontier settlement meant that law enforcement was just constantly playing catch-up. And because formal law enforcement struggled so immensely, frontier justice became wildly inconsistent. It created this really polarized reality. Some outlaws cleverly spun their own PR, styling themselves as Robin Hood figures, and certain communities actually celebrated them as folk heroes, fighting back against wealthy banks or powerful railroad tycoons. But to others, those exact same guys were feared as ruthless, cold-blooded criminals who violently disrupted the peace. Whether a man was a hero or a villain really just depended on who you asked and where you lived along the frontier. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. The real Wild West wasn't just a dusty backdrop for simple morality tales and cinematic gunfights. It was a deeply complex, fiercely contested crucible of survival, incredible diversity, and sweeping transformation that fundamentally built modern America. It was about profound struggle and extraordinary human endurance. Knowing the gritty, unvarnished truth, honestly, isn't the real history so much more fascinating than the Hollywood myth? Thanks for joining me to unpack the true story of the Untamed.
Welcome back to another historical English video explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most heavily romanticized periods in all of American history. You know, when we think of the Wild West, our minds instantly jump to those classic cinematic myths, right? Cowboys riding off into the sunset, high noon shootouts, that rugged individualism, and hey, it makes for absolutely incredible entertainment. But the actual history, it's this fascinating, kind of messy collision between those tall tales and the cold, hard, industrial realities that eventually shut the American frontier down for good. So we're going to look at the people who enforce the law and the machines that systematically changed their world forever.
But first, it really begs this central question. How on earth did an era defined by outlaws, sweeping plains, and frontier lawmen disappear almost overnight? Because spoiler alert, it wasn't some slow, gradual fade. It was a rapid, structural transformation. We're going to bypass the Hollywood agendas today and drop straight into the narrative action to understand exactly how the Wild West was won and ultimately how it was lost to time.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Legends of the Law, the Gunfighters and the Grit. So, as crime was just rapidly spreading across the untamed frontier, these new booming towns desperately needed people willing to step up and enforce the law. And let me tell you, this was an incredibly visceral, dangerous world. These frontier lawmen were operating with little to no backup, and they had absolutely zero guarantees of safety. To really wrap our heads around the intensity of their daily reality, just think about this: 60 seconds, literally less than a minute. Back in 1881, a lawman named Wyatt Earp, along with his brothers and his buddy Doc Holliday, got into the now legendary gunfight at the OK Corral down in Tombstone, Arizona. And that entire world-famous shootout, the whole shebang, was over in less than 60 seconds.
But in those few chaotic seconds, 3 outlaws were killed and boom, a legend is born. It instantly became one of the most famous gunfights in American history, and Wyatt Earp's name was just permanently etched into American lore as this ultimate symbol of justice. But the crucial thing to remember here is that while those few seconds made him a legend, the actual lives of these men were incredibly complicated. They were far, far more nuanced than that simple good guy in a white hat image we're so used to seeing today. Let's look at another one of these incredibly complex figures, Wild Bill Hickok. To survive out on the frontier, a legend basically had to wear a million different hats. Hickok was renowned first and foremost for his exceptional marksmanship, sure, but he wasn't just a gunfighter. The guy served as a sheriff, he worked as a scout, and he fought as a soldier. He was basically a human multi-tool for the frontier, constantly adapting to whatever highly dangerous job needed doing. However, living that kind of dangerous life often came with a pretty tragic punchline. Hickok's life ended violently in 1876. He was just sitting there playing a game of poker in Deadwood, South Dakota, when he was shot and killed. And the cards he was holding at that exact moment, a pair of black aces and black eights. It's a hand that forever after became known as the dead man's hand. It's a really striking reminder of the sudden, brutal end that met so many of these frontier symbols of justice.
But what really catalyzed the end of that wild era? Let's look at Section 2, the railroad changes everything. Or as they called it back then, the Iron Horse arrives.
Because honestly, the Wild West was transformed forever by one single massive invention. This was the paradigm shift that totally rewired the country. Before 1869, traveling across America was this grueling, arduous journey that took months of dangerous, exhausting effort. But after the first transcontinental railroad finally connected the eastern and western US in 1869, it took days, just days. The technological leap here is absolutely staggering. It essentially shrank the entire continent overnight. And this insane new speed of travel triggered a massive socio-economic domino effect. Check this out. 1. Goods suddenly moved faster than ever before. 2. Because goods were flying across the country, businesses expanded rapidly. 3. To support all that expansion, entirely new towns just appeared overnight along the railway lines. And 4. All this new infrastructure encouraged literally millions of settlers to pack up everything and move west. It was this cascading wave of industry that the frontier simply could not run. But we have to acknowledge that this wave of industry did not wash over an empty land. Which brings us to Section 3, the cost of expansion, the price of progress. This hyper-fast westward expansion had some seriously devastating consequences that completely reshaped the lives of those who already called the frontier home. This changing landscape came at a massive cost. Many Native American communities tragically lost access to their traditional hunting lands. As millions moved west and those railroads violently cut across the plains, the traditional way of life for indigenous communities was fundamentally disrupted. On top of that, the buffalo populations, which were frankly already under immense pressure from commercial hunting, declined dramatically. The ecosystem and the cultures that relied on it were being permanently dismantled by this rapid expansion.
And that somber reality brings us to the final chapter of our explainer, Section 4, the end of the frontier, fading into history.
By the late 1800s, this sweeping age of isolation was pretty much done, and the Wild West, as everyone knew it, was being systematically dismantled and replaced. The shift was overwhelming, bringing in a totally harsh new reality. Railroads now linked the entire nation. Telegraph lines connected once distant towns, enabling instant communication, kind of like a 19th century version of the internet. Law enforcement became much more organized, replacing the lone gunman with systemic, structured order. The invention of barbed wire fenced off private land, which completely killed the era of large, open-range cattle drives. And finally, new states were officially joining the Union. The Wild was, quite literally, being engineered right out of the West.
Which leads us directly to this definitive data point, 1890. This is the year that marks the absolute, data-driven finality of the era we've been exploring today. The systemic changes had finally reached a tipping point.
In that exact year, 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau made this official, very sobering announcement. The American frontier no longer existed in the way it once had. The government was officially declaring that the physical line between civilization and the wilderness had just vanished. The book on the American frontier was closed.
But the crucial takeaway here is that the Wild West was so much more than just gunfights and cowboy hats. It was a deeply complex time of incredible courage, unparalleled opportunity, bitter conflict, and massive world-changing innovation. It was an era of extraordinary change that fundamentally shaped the culture, the economy, and the very identity of the United States in ways that we can still clearly see today.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Yes, the frontier officially closed in 1890, but did the Wild West ever really end? I mean, the cowboys, the outlaws, the sheriffs, Native American leaders, and pioneers, they became these permanent, lasting symbols of American history. Their experiences went on to inspire countless books, blockbusters, and documentaries. So while the geographic frontier disappeared beneath the tracks of the railroad, you could argue the cultural frontier lives on, remaining one of the most recognizable and captivating chapters in America's past. Thank you so much for joining me for this historical English video explainer, and I will see you